Lep dober dan. Good day, good afternoon. Welcome to one of the many very, very important and very interesting discussions and events and activities we've been having in the last days, and some are still to come within our Pride Parade Festival 2017. This discussion now will take place in English language. My name is Simona. I will be moderating, and before I go into the content part, a couple of just very short technical info. So the way we've planned tonight, because it's a very full and exciting evening, is that we'll have about 1.5 hours of kind of presentational discussion and then bit forum discussion with our guest, Kitty Anderson. Kitty, thank you for being here with us. And then we'll have a short break. There'll also be a refreshment just outside in the next door space. And then from 8 to 9, we're going to have another part of the program. We'll have a video conference with our artist who's work actually we are showing during the festival next door in the city hall in the glass atrium there. And Ela Xora, the British UK-based artist, will speak about her work. And so afterwards, we're still not finished with the evening. As I said, it's very exciting. And then afterwards, there'll be a bit of a break again, so we can breathe in the air outside for a while. And then at around 10-ish, we expect to be able then to continue with a kind of musical or music performance, not musical, music performance, decolonization of sound with another 2 guests from the US. So exciting evening. Welcome. I hope you have the endurance to be with us for all the evening, because it's a very how to say also challenging in a way, the kind of topics that we want to raise in tonight's discussion. So if somebody has a difficulty with English language, we can, or doesn't understand some words or something like this, please also raise our, just attention, and we'll try to translate and improvise a little bit on the spot. So that's also another thing. So if we are ready, then I would like to start, and I would like to introduce to you Kitty Anderson, as I said before. Kitty is a guest from Iceland. The person who built up Intersex Island, and also is on the executive board of organization of Intersex International. And I would like to take a short minute to maybe explain the path, how we came to be here together, or sit together here with you tonight. So about a little bit over a year ago, when we were preparing the Pride Parade Festival 2016, there was already the first seeds of an idea that it would be really amazing to be able to open again, or open in another way, or raise attention to the topic of intersex here in Slovenia. And we started some initial discussions with Anja Koletnik from Transakcija at that time, and had a bit of an ambition to try to put something together for this year's festival. And eventually we were successful, because through the help of Anja also we managed to identify and invite Kitty, because Transakcija in the past has been working together with organization of Intersex International for also supporting some translations into Slovenian language and kind of basic information sharing that would be available for intersex people from Slovenia. So I would like to explain this, because I think every event like this is a community effort, and in this regard I would like to thank also the cooperation with Transakcija on this point. That said, we will come a little bit later to say a little bit more perhaps about the activism, about the organizations and what exists. But to start our discussion, our thesis is that actually in Slovenia, not many people know when we talk about intersex people, who are we actually talking about? I think it's at least our experience also in preparing this festival and this event is that even within our own LGBT community, there is maybe not enough clarity or not enough information, and I don't know, maybe it's unfair, but sometimes even conclusion can be maybe not enough interest, I don't know. So to start this discussion, Kitty, just brief introduction. When we talk about intersex people, who do we actually talk about?
Okay, so intersex is a term that maybe some of you have heard before, and it's a term that many people misunderstand. So when we are talking about intersex people, or intersex in general, then we are talking about biology. We're talking about sex characteristics. That is, the biological aspects that make up a person's body in relation to what we view as sex. So this can be primary sex characteristics such as chromosomes, inner or outer genitalia, reproductive systems, or hormone status. So either the level of hormones that the body produces or how the body responds to hormones. These intersex can also become apparent during puberty in secondary sex characteristics. That is all the aspects that sort of start developing when you start going through puberty. So that is things like breast growth, hair growth, muscle mass, stature, or fat distribution around the body. So here we're just talking about biological aspects that most people connect to sex. We have this mistaken belief that all women have XX chromosomes and ovaries and uterus and a certain hormonal system, and that all men have XY chromosomes, that all men have penises, testes, and a certain hormone level. This just isn't true. A lot of intersex people are men and women with just biologies that are a bit different. These biological aspects that we connect to sex aren't so cut and clear. They're actually a very complicated interplay between your chromosomes, genes that activate how your body responds to hormones, the levels of hormones that you produce. So, to start this off with, I'm going to preface this with that every single cis man in this room started out with a vagina. The female phenotype is the default pathway for all humans. When all fetuses start developing, they start out developing along the same path. Around 6 to 8 weeks, the fetus starts being bombarded with hormones. So either estrogen or testosterone. Any fetus that does not respond to testosterone will be born looking like a girl, no matter their chromosomes, no matter about anything else. Just your outer body is the result of what hormones you received in utero. The same goes with any fetus that starts developing with XX chromosomes. They generally develop along the female phenotype path. So phenotype means sort of the outward appearance of the body. But if a fetus that has XX chromosomes has enough testosterone, they will be born looking like a boy. And they will probably be assigned as boy when they're born. In some cases, the fetus will have not enough testosterone to go all the way towards having a penis, regardless of whether that fetus has XY chromosomes, XX chromosomes, or another setup of chromosomes, which could be XXY, X, XYY. It's complicated. So in those cases, then a child will be born with genitalia that is somewhere between looking like a vagina or looking like a penis. These children are the children that are usually spotted quite early, soon after they're born. And they're often subjected, or routinely, almost always, subjected to quite invasive surgical treatments to sort of normalize the appearance of their bodies. Intersex doesn't really have anything to do with your gender identity. Intersex people can have any gender identity. Research we have shows that the majority of intersex people identify as men or women, and then there are a bunch of intersex people also who identify as non-binary. There isn't an equal sign between having a body that isn't quite typically male or quite typically female and having a non-binary gender identity, because your sex characteristics and your gender identity are two separate aspects of who you are. And intersex doesn't really have anything to do with your sexual orientation. Your biology doesn't determine your sexual orientation. That's about who you love, who you want to engage in relationships with. So intersex people can have any sexual orientation. A lot of intersex people are straight. Some are lesbians, some are gay men, some are bisexual, or pansexual, or even asexual.
I think this is very interesting because at least I can say, and for my generation, and there are many colleagues here in the room a couple of years younger maybe, but I can say that what we learned in school was something quite different. It was very deterministic in that way that, you know, there was no doubt about that people are born either as female or male, and this is all the educational system at least until end of high school, when you are about 18 years old and you've undergone the, you know, the obligatory school system, and I doubt that this has changed here. So how, you know, what is your, in your experience also, what does, you know, because now what we are talking about is that actually, well, that's just not true, right? So what needs to happen here on just on this level, how to actually explain or what to do here in terms of even just basic education? I mean, how to change that, for example.
Are you asking me how to change the entire Slovenian education system?
I mean, I think that throughout this discussion, the ambition will be to challenge a lot of things, at least in theory. The practical part will be our homework. But for sure, I mean, because now we are talking about basically building up a whole society and generations of people with just misinformation. So how to deal with that, even?
Okay, so first let's start looking at some numbers. So a common statistic that is used to cover intersex people is 1 in 1,500 to 1 in 2,000. That's bullshit. That might be closer to the number of children who are born, and the doctor looks at their genitals and says, oh, we're not quite sure. Recent Dutch research points to the number of intersex people being at least 1 in 200, but that's only intersex people who medicine has decided that they have a name to put on that biology. The UN, the United Nations, they use a statistic of 1.7%. So that is more along the lines of anybody whose biology doesn't fit quite well enough into the male or female categories, that they will never. So that's sort of the number of people's biologies who don't quite fit into the male or female categories, and will sort of maybe face some issues relating to this in life. So this could be that they get weird reactions from their doctors because of their hormone levels, or they get weird reactions from society because their body develops in a little bit different way. Or, yeah. So the first thing is sort of just pushing out information that no, at least 0.5% of the population is definitely not biologically quite male or female, and 1.7% of the population has a variation in sex characteristics. So sex characteristics are the primary and secondary sex characteristics discussed before. Regarding tackling education systems in the Balkan states, in Iceland, what we do is we have peer education teams that go out to schools. So this means that the national LGBTQIAP organization has a team of educators that go out to public schools and educate about sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, and sex characteristics. I somehow doubt that that would be a realistic approach here.
There are two levels, I think, to that that thing. And for one is that yes, in Slovenia, one of the things we're struggling with the LGBTIQ plus organizations is to actually have any kind of access to schools. And the other, of course, is to have competences and capacity to also cover the specific knowledge and information spreading that then involves intersex people. And I think those are the two levels that are definitely our homework. Yeah. So that's definitely one thing.
But so maybe starting with educating teachers, that could be a possible route to go. It might be hard to get teachers on board to come and listen to education, but as soon as you start getting some teachers, then that will very likely sort of spread a bit. They'll talk to some of their colleagues, and that would hopefully grow. As soon as educators become aware of, for example, in biology class, to not teach absolutes, to say you are either this or that and there is nothing else, at least for when it comes to gender identity and expression and sex characteristics, that is at least the start.
Mm-hmm. Why I think this is an important question for us is also because when we discussed already, and we had also a workshop already this morning on the topic, one of the things that in a way you addressed already there is also the social stigma that comes with this. And here, maybe before we go more structurally into that, I actually want to ask you about your personal experience also, because you mentioned to me that also for you found out about being an intersex person in your early 20s. So if I understood correctly. Kind of. Okay, so maybe you can say a little bit how this path was for you, and also what is maybe interesting for us is who were, let's say, the stakeholders, if we can use that language, or who were those groups of people in your life that somehow are important in maybe your personal experience, but also maybe other intersex people's experience.
So it is very true that I did not hear the word intersex until I was 22. But I was told about my biology being different when I was 13. My mother knew from when I was 8 weeks old. So when I was 6 weeks old, I was taken in for a hernia operation. And the hernia operation was supposed to take an hour and a half. 5 hours later, my mother is freaking out, going, "Where is my daughter?" And the doctors are just saying, "Oh, there's nothing wrong, this is just routine." And they wheel me out 6 hours later or so, 5-6 hours later, and my mother is just sent home with me. About 2 weeks later, she has to take me back to the hospital because my incision for the hernia operation was becoming infected. And there she was told that I had a very severe and serious chromosome anomaly, and nothing else, and sent home, being told that a specialist was finishing his education in the US and would be arriving in the country a week or two after. So my mother goes home and freaks out for a couple of weeks because she thought that I would be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life, that I would not be able to feed myself, that I would not be able to go to school, that I would not be able to speak to her. Because that was sort of the framework that she had for somebody having a severe chromosome abnormality. She's told the truth when that specialist came to the country, became very relieved for a few days, and then 3 days later called him asking 120 different questions. So my doctor told her not to tell me, period, that it would be too difficult for me to find out at such a young age, and that she should keep this a secret for me so that I would develop like a normal young girl. So she told me when I was 13. That is the worst age in the world to tell somebody like this. You're a teenager, you just want to fit in, you just want to be like all your friends, and then somebody sort of throws a little bit of a bomb into your life saying, no, what you've believed for the last 13 years isn't true. So, yeah, I became a very shitty teenager. Adults told lies, so I just went, no, don't have to listen to them. An adult, my teacher or something, said, yes, you have to do this schoolwork, and I would go and read Edgar Allan Poe or something else. For me, the years between 13 and 15 were hard because I was told that I would never ever meet anybody else like myself. Bullshit. And that I shouldn't tell anyone. So for 2 years I kept this completely secret and just sort of was a disruptive teenager, was institutionalized in a state psychiatric ward at the age of 14 because I was diagnosed with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and oppositional defiancy disorder. And when I went into the state psychiatric ward, I was told not to tell anyone, that the psychiatrist there wouldn't be able to understand, that it would interfere with my treatment. Being the oppositional and defiant teenager that I was, I did tell them. I got very good treatment there. I did a lot of art therapy, sort of got treated very well there, very kindly and very respectfully, and was discharged 7 weeks later with a new diagnosis of mild depression, brought on by traumatic life events, basically finding out that I had been lied to. So yeah, then another year goes by, things start getting better, I start accepting this more and more, and then when I'm 15, my cousin is born, and she was also intersex. And I finally had somebody who was just like me. I had this tiny little bundle of perfectness with red hair sticking out all over the place. And that I could sort of hold in my arms, look down and say, yeah, she's like me, and she's perfect, so I'm perfect. Well, as perfect as you can be. For me, just that one thing, having somebody else like me, even though I couldn't talk to her yet, was extremely healing. And then when I was 22, we found a support group in the UK. We actually found that support group a few years earlier, but when I was 22, we went to the UK to a support group meeting, and I met a bunch of people who were kind of like me. And that was actually where I for the first time heard the word intersex. It was also the first time that I learned that I had been born with internal testes. My doctor had always said non-functioning gonadal tissue, which was a lie. So yeah, for me, It was hard being alone, being the only one, thinking I would never meet anyone else. As soon as my cousin was there and I had that connection, and then as soon as I went and met a full room of people like me, things became a lot easier to deal with, a lot easier to process, and it just became part of who I am.
Thank you very much. Thanks for sharing also that path. But I guess maybe it's fair to say you are not also alone in the way of the path, huh? Not only in a way of not being a lonesome person in terms of being an intersex person, but also, I guess, also other intersex people. You are working now on an organized level, and you meet, and you are able to look at things also from a distance, probably, from what happens. Is this a common path for people that, because you explained also in your life, on one hand side, obviously your family, but very important role also played the medical sphere on the different levels. I guess your mother or your parents didn't necessarily have per se the idea this has to be such a secret. It was probably an indication from the medical sphere, if I understand this correctly. So how does this play in other people's lives? Is it a common experience? Is this still the case? What do other people report now, some years after?
So, a lot of intersex people, my age, older, a bit younger, basically sort of the same story. Not being told for some people who are even older than me, then they were lied to completely and told that they had cancer as kids and had to have full hysterectomies, and that's why they couldn't have kids, that's why they had to take hormones. Others were told around their teen years, in some cases a bit younger. So this is sort of a very common theme. However, in some countries, medical professionals are increasingly advising to tell children at young age so that they never have sort of this moment of being told, that they sort of grow up knowing this. But we have reports from other countries where this is still being kept from children. But even when it's not kept from the children themselves or the people themselves, then there's often sort of very strong and strict instructions to not tell other people. That as soon as you start telling the people around you that you'll face discrimination, bullying, harassment, ostracization, all of the bad stuff. So for a lot of people, they sort of just grow up keeping this a secret. They're just a man or a woman in society, and they don't really tell anyone. In many cases, people don't even tell their partners. So they'll go through their entire life having only talked about this with their doctor and possibly their parents. But there is sort of an increase in people willing to be out in some way. That doesn't mean that there's a huge, rapid increase in people willing to speak publicly, go to the media, speak in front of rooms of people. But there is an increase in people feeling comfortable enough in society today to at least tell their friends or the people who are closest to them. But then we also have cases where somebody who has kept this from their partner tells their partner of 10, 15 years, finally works up the courage, and their partner leaves them, either because they can't deal with the fact that this person has a different biology, or they can't deal with the fact that their partner lied to them. So it really often comes back to the lies. The lies cause problems. The lies cause shame. The lies cause stigma. The lies cause families to sort of have bad relationships and partnerships to break up.
We have a bunch of questions to go in also more structural approach to this, but maybe now that we're a little bit with the personal experience, maybe somebody from the audience has some question or some comment at this point already. everybody who knows me, you already know I'm very comfortable with silence. Yeah, I give you a little bit of time, contemplate, because I have many questions. Okay, so then we'll continue with a few more questions. I want to go a little bit into the situation in Slovenia because, well, obviously we tried to prepare for having intersex as an important topic of this festival. We wanted to prepare for this event, and we tried to do homework, research. Okay, so what is there written in Slovenian language about the topic? What were the media coverages? Who is researching, and so on. And my colleague Anna spent some weeks compiling the information and trying to contact different people and so on. And actually, in comparison to most other topics that we work on as Ljubljana Pride Association, our findings were miserable. Yeah, the coverage is very, very poor. There was one moment in about 2009 when a couple of articles were published in some more popular media here in Slovenia. And there was the 2009 somehow was a couple of media also coverages on world level. So there was a lot of discussion in popular media about the genitalia of Lady Gaga, for example. There was a discussion about Castor Semenya, the runner. And there were a couple of, these kind of moments of sensationalism on global level. And then there are a few articles written at that time here in Slovenia. And there were a couple of things mentioned in those articles that I thought would be interesting to talk about or to look at. One thing is that in 2009, the more, let's say, populist media was talking about hermaphroditism, about hermaphrodites, so was not mentioning the word. At that time, I think people that were a bit more aware as writers were using the word intersexuality, but the more kind of sensationalist media was using the word hermaphroditism all the time, or dvospolnost, which is like being of two sexes, yeah. So that was one thing, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the terminology, about where that comes from. Is it appropriate? Is it offensive? Is it derogatory or not? We, in preparation of this festival, with colleagues from other organizations that are also sensitive to linguistics, we had to have a couple of kind of discussion rounds what terminology also to introduce or to use, because we knew that it might get more coverage, and we decided commonly that for the time being to use the word of interspolnost, interspolne osebe. So definitely the terminology is probably one of the things to develop a vocabulary, a language around. Was the Slovenian media of 2009 doing a kind of a bad job in using those terms?
Well, if we start with the term hermaphrodite, that term is derived from Greek mythology and basically means a being that has a penis and a vagina and testicles, ovaries, and a uterus, and can basically self-impregnate themselves. No, that's not how it is. Penis and vagina are the same thing. It's extremely rare. Like, there have been cases of a woman being born with two vaginas. There has been a case of, like, a guy being born with two penises. So, like, there are cases where a person has two genitals, but no, intersex is not having a penis and a vagina and being able to impregnate yourself. Snails are hermaphrodites. Earthworms are hermaphrodites. That's what a hermaphrodite is. Now, in medical literature, you will see this term sometimes used, and you will also see the terminology pseudo-hermaphrodite or fake hermaphrodite. That's also not appropriate language because, firstly, we're not hermaphrodites, and secondly, we're not fake. We're like real people. Hello, here we are. When it comes to two sexes, that's just directly derived from hermaphrodite, that you are of both sexes at the same time. It's not so much that your biology is somehow a bit blended or a bit outside these sort of binary notions of what a male body is or what a female body is. There is no such thing as a male or female body. If we look at sex and we start thinking of sex on a continuum, and when I say continuum, please do not think of straight line with little dots. Think of a huge, vast solar system where every single star represents a person. None of them is exactly the same. Now draw a line in the solar system here, and draw a line in the solar system here. Now somebody has decided that people on this side of the line are male and somebody on this side of the line are female when it comes to their sort of biological traits. Completely ignoring the fact that if the line is here and there's one star here and one star here, these people are very close in biology, whereas the star over here is much more different in biology than the two stars who are very close together. Biology is really complicated. There's a whole huge interplay of just how receptive to a certain tissue your hormones are, how receptive to a certain hormone your tissues are, and things like that. So this sort of biological determinism of male and female is just something that was once decided because most women are sort of somewhere over here and most men are somewhere over here. Somebody decided, yep, so we have two distinct categories. Doesn't work like that. We have a whole interplay of varying different biologies that are all over the place. No two people share the same biology. No two people have the exact same interplay of responsiveness, hormone production, chromosomes, all these things. None of these things even really matter that much. Like, when we're walking around in society, are we chromosome checking people when we meet them? No. Are we checking their hormone levels? No. We're responding to their gender identity, or their gender expression. We're responding to how we as society have decided that there is feminine and masculine, and we respond to how people present themselves. Well, and then there are people who just are idiots, and we'll ignore that for the time being. But it's all just about who people are, not what little building blocks were used to make that particular person.
Very true. However, and that's the problem, because there is a however, and this however is connected to the way systems in our society work. And one very, very big system that I guess influences a lot the lives of intersex people, intersex children, as actually other children that are not intersex, is the medical sphere. It's the doctors, is the the gynecologists in even before someone is born. Then it's afterwards pediatric care. It's a whole set of medical sphere that eventually gets involved if they are, let's say, confused, or if they can kind of like put a category which is for them not the male or not the female. So what does actually happen in these cases? Because we have somehow the perception that the way it works is that the medical sphere identifies that there is something wrong and has to be fixed. And so how in the experience of intersex people, what does actually happen on that level? Who is involved in these decision making, and where to hell do they get the notion from that there is something wrong? Like, you know, why for the medicine there would be something wrong? Talking about cases where maybe there's not a medical emergency to intervene surgically, for example, but which in most cases is not. So why do they get this medical phenomena that, okay, this needs to be fixed?
So the current treatment paradigm for intersex infants started in the 1950s. Basically, a psychologist decided that gender is plastic. You can mold gender. That so long as a person's body looks like a certain gender, and they are raised as a certain gender, and given the appropriate clothes and the appropriate toys and all that, they will agree with that gender identity. And this was actually tested out on a bunch of children. If you Google the story of David Reimer was a twin boy. His brother and him were born in the US and went in for circumcision, which was and is still quite routine there. His brother was circumcised first, and then David Reimer was. And his penis was, during an experimental form of circumcision, burnt off. He was surgically assigned as a girl and raised as a girl. And because he wore a dress without kicking and screaming and ripping it off, and because when the girls were sent to play with dolls, he ran along with the girls and sat there moving dolls around, it was touted as a success. However, when he had to start hormone therapy as a teenager and was told what had happened to him, he just went, so that explains it. Because he always envied his brother. He wanted to be just like his brother. Because gender identity isn't like this plastic ball of plasticine that you can just form and make. Gender identity is an ingrained sense of who you are as a person, as a part of the society. So this theory was sort of disproven, but John Money never actually officially redacted this theory. So it continued to be used in regards to intersex children, that if they weren't operated on, they would grow up to identify as something in between. And you can't be in between, because of course everything has to be strictly on one side or the other side. That was sarcasm. It doesn't have to be strictly on one side or the other side. So this sort of continued influencing the way medicine treated these kids, that they had to clearly look one way or the other way. And when I say clearly look one way or the other way, then we're talking about genitals. Because you can't really tell on little kids like what kind of genitals they have. You read what clothing they're wearing before you say boy or girl. You read sort of their haircut and whether that is a haircut that is appropriate for a boy or a girl. I mean, there was a case recently in the US where a little girl on a soccer team was like told that she couldn't play with them because she had short hair and was wearing boy shorts and a boy's t-shirt, like from the boys division, because she wasn't a girl. So here we're just talking about what the genitals look like when the child is growing up. So doctors used to perform clitoral amputations when the clitoral was completely removed. Today it's more common that clitoral reductions are performed, where the tip of the clitoris is sort of cut almost all the way off, and then the middle part is pulled out, cut away, and the tip is sewn back on. Vaginoplasties in young children, the thing with vaginoplasties is that if a vagina that has been created this way isn't in some way used, it will atrophy and has a danger of closing over. So young children need to have medical dilators, basically a medical dildo, inserted into their vagina to keep it open. I mean, that's not something that little kids should have to have done to them, and that's not something that a parent should ever have to do to their child. We also have cases where a boy's penis is deemed too small, and they will inject that boy with testosterone before he reaches the age of 6 months to try to get the penis to become larger. Or if there is a suspicion that a parent is carrying an intersex child, they will be given very strong medication to reduce the size of the clitoris while that child is forming in the womb. The medication that's used has very negative long-term effects on cognition, on mental health, and other issues. Sweden has actually banned it. So there's this notion that by making sure that everyone looks clearly one way or the other, they'll just agree with the gender that they were forcibly assigned. It doesn't work like that. If this were the case, then everybody who was assigned a girl in childhood would identify as a girl. Bullshit. That's not how it works. And the same, everybody who had been assigned boy in childhood would identify as a boy. That's not how it works, because gender identity doesn't really have anything to do with your biological aspects. That's who you are when you grow to become a person who realizes their gender identity. I mean, most 6-month-old probably don't. But as soon as you sort of grow to become of an age where you have a gender identity, then you start understanding and sort of discovering who you are. And that doesn't always stay completely 100% fixed throughout time. Your sense of self can alter over the years. I've known people who sort of identified as women for a long time, and then, no, I actually don't identify fully as a woman, I identify more as non-binary. It's all good. It's all positive, so long as people just get to be who they are and are respected for who they are, then why does it matter? But medicine is of the mistaken belief that by performing these interventions we'll create perfect boys and girls. There's no such thing as a perfect boy or girl. We're all just sort of this huge spectrum of identity and experience and biology.
I was mentioning before the moment in 2009 here in Slovenia. There was another type of article published at that time. Diana Matkovic, journalist, wrote very interestingly kind of extended article for Slovenian version of Playboy. However, in that article in 2009 also, she was covering the topic of gender, and an important part of that article was also about intersex people here in Slovenia. And part of the article and the research she made was also with the doctors treating intersex children here at the time in 2009. So she spoke with the gynecologist, with urologist, endocrinologist, pediatrics, and psychologists involved. And the interesting part in that article that was for me is that the surgical professional, like a pediatric surgeon, was saying that no, we never advise parents surgery. This is not allowed. We don't. We only explain to the parents after they ask us what can they do, their options. So actually, if you are having any kind of claims around the world from intersex people that they have been kind of violated through surgical intervention and violated by the medical sphere, this is not true. So they have been violated by their parents because their parents ask for these surgeries. And actually, no, for the doctors here, it's forbidden to promote that option. So that was one interesting part in that article. The other interesting part that I found, and I chose to say, is that there was also the psychologist, or in this case, a psychiatrist opinion represented there. And actually, the psychiatrist in the article was the one very strongly in favor of the operation, of the, you know, defining the one or the other sex for the child. And because, yeah, this would definitely be very important for the success of this child to be a member of society, because that's the way how society, you know, functions. And this is because, of course, it would not be possible for young children in particular to live, you know, not unmarked or undamaged if they would not be defined one way or another. And so that's it's I don't know. It was very, for me, when I read it, I was quite yeah. I had my moment of having to breathe deeply through those statements. But I want to ask, because I know that we have a couple of people maybe that are studying medicine or nursing or in this profession, because we tried to have with us on stage people from medical profession. Unfortunately, you can see our success rate. Yeah, and I think this says something also about the situation. But I know that we have a couple of students or former students. Maybe you can share a little bit. What does it happen on that side? You know, what do your professors, doctors, actually teach you about this topic, and particularly how to handle it, and what's the instruction you get while being in training? And I'm looking at, for example, at Eva there, because there's a colleague of ours, and we discussed that she would share a little bit this perspective.
Hello, I am Eva. Hello Kitty, and I am very thankful for you sharing this story of yours, and also thank you for basically presenting the intersex. I had the experience with a professor, basically pediatric doctor, who also taught at medical faculty. And basically he told us at classes that when there is a type, you know, that one sex cannot be designated at birth, that they need to basically do the operation on the kid. And basically they will then attempt to determine biological sex of the kid. And when I asked why is that, you know, why is that necessary? Basically he told us that if they don't do that, the person will be very confused during the lifetime, you know, and that they will basically struggle during the whole lifetime, and that also the parents should not basically tell their kids what happened to them, and also if they are going through the problems during their lifetime, that they should never be told that.
Which year was this?
2014.
Yeah, so that's maybe somebody else has experience as a student. Okay, so
regarding the sort of, it's the parents' fault, I call bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. So the University of Zurich performed research that was published in 2013. The research was basically, they took a group of people, split them into two groups. One group was shown a medicalized video. Medicalized video explaining basically what was wrong with their child. The other group was shown a demedicalized video, just information presented in a more neutral way by a psychologist. So, Out of the entire group of parents, about 44, my math isn't so good, 44% around there chose early surgery for their child. But when you looked at the different response rates from the different groups, of those shown the medicalized information, 66% chose surgery for their imaginary child. Of the parents who were shown the demedicalized information, that fell down to 23%. So that means that if all parents were presented with neutral, demedicalized information, only 23% of them would be stressing out enough to say, yes, but surgery, surgery, surgery. The fact is that in another piece of research that was done on the subjective need for psychological support, firstly, there's the fact that a huge amount of parents got no psychological support whatsoever, at all. Like 52% of the parents who felt that they needed psychological support got zero. Only like 22% of the parents who felt they needed psychological support got any. Of the group of parents in that study, 82% of parents had been recommended by their doctor that their child should have cosmetic genital surgery. So if you look at these two pieces of research together, that if parents are presented with medicalized information, it greatly increases their chance of choosing surgery. And then 82% of the parents in the second study were advised surgery. Of course parents are going to choose surgery for their kid. I mean, as a parent myself, I had a young son who had an issue with the foreskin where there were repeated infections. And 4 doctors in a row told me if this doesn't soon start getting better, he will need to be circumcised. So when I went to the 5th doctor, I went in going, my kid needs a circumcision. You need to make this happen now. Like, hardcore. Because I wanted to do what was best for my kid. That doctor said, well, no. No, he doesn't. You need to do like these special stretchy thing that doesn't really hurt. Like just sort of pull the foreskin back so that it goes back and doesn't gather up stuff that causes infection. And I was like, but every time I put on the cream, he screams and he yells and he shouts. Well, how did they teach you to put on the cream? Well, pulling everything back and putting the cream on. No, that's going to cause him so much pain, and taught me like a really simple way of putting on the cream that didn't cause any pain. 3 months later, issue sorted. Bad medical advice. It happens.
Yeah. So considering that we've opened like a whole hole or pit or cave of issues, and knowing very well that in Slovenia this situation is not addressed, it's completely in the hands of a very small minority of doctors, and making these decisions, also knowing at the same time that at this point we don't have a particular organization covering of intersex people fighting for the rights, the human rights of intersex people, or trying to address this structurally. So we know that also in the civil society there's a lack of support, and so basically we are at the beginning of all of this. So how was it for you in a way, because I think that also in Iceland, I guess they're explaining your story, we can see that there was also not really much support, and there was really maybe not also so good information, and it had to be built up, and you did build up Intersex Island. So what does it take also, or what is your experience as being an activist also in this topic, trying to raise it also maybe inside the LGBTQ community, or is the community your natural ally in this way or not? Is there a struggle there as well, or was it for you? And what are some of the necessary things that need to happen in order to, let's say, have good ground or to start something?
So for me, I had a very negative view to the LGBT community for a period of my time. Well, not the LGBT community, the LGB community. Because when this story that I'm about to tell happens, trans was definitely not included within the LGBT community of Iceland. In 2005, I called my national LGBT organization. I didn't want to join. I didn't want to add to the acronym. I just figured, well, they get that people are discriminated against for who they are. They might understand. And asked, okay, so explained my situation and said, would it be okay if we get to use your meeting space, your community hall, like maybe once a month for 2 or 3 hours, and start advertising support group meetings? And the person who answered the phone, who was working at the organization then, said, no, there is no space for freaks like you here. So for almost a decade, if I saw a rainbow, I looked the other way. If I saw LGB anything, and then later after 2009 LGBT anything, I went, oh, yeah, I'm not looking at that. Because to me, this one person who was a dick turned me against an entire community because I thought, well, they think I'm freak. It wasn't until in early 2014, a friend of mine who was living in Ireland at the moment, sent me a Facebook message and saying, hey, so Reykjavik Pride wants to do something on intersex issues. And I was like, what? Yes, and got kind of freaked out. So she said, can I connect the two of you? And it took me a full 2 days to decide to say yes. But I'm very grateful, or very sort of happy that I did eventually say yes, because I met with a great person who has worked with Pride for years, a lesbian. We're very good friends today. I adore her. She's great. Who just took the time to sit with me for 45 minutes saying, I'm not doing an interview now. I just want to have coffee. If you want to walk out of here after this discussion and never talk to me again, that's fine. So we sat there chatting for 45 minutes and then emailed a couple of times and set up a time for an interview. And I started working with Reykjavik Pride. And they made intersex issues a forefront issue that year. That was sort of also one of the things that made me feel that maybe I could do more than just sort of try to set up a support group. Maybe I could actually become an intersex activist. I'd been an activist in other fields before, in refugee and asylum issues, anti-corruption movement, other things like that. But not on my issue. There I was still sort of thinking just support groups. So a really sensitive Pride person just helped me get to know the LGBT community in Iceland, and that made me realize that, okay, sure, there might be a few people within the LGBT community who are kind of idiots, but that's true of any community. Of course there's going to be somebody within our community who's a bit yeah, because that's true of any community. Doesn't matter what community it is. So I was just super unlucky. That's the first sort of person within the community of sort of activist community that I encountered. Like, I had friends who were part of the community, but they were just my friends who happened to be gay or lesbian or trans. Like, that was just part of who they were. But yeah, so being very careful of like what you put out there. Don't sensationalize. Don't use intersex people for some purpose to deconstruct other aspects of sexual orientation or gender identity. Like, just put out good resources. Show that you're aware that there is a human rights angle to this. Share intersex resources from actual intersex organizations, so like toolkits, resource lists, things like that. So sort of putting it out there that you are approachable, and that if people show up, they won't get called freaks, they won't get called hermaphrodites, they won't get called two-sexed. When they say they're a woman, you will actually believe that they're a woman, and when they say they're a man, you'll believe that they're a man, and if they say they're a lesbian, you won't say, no, you can't be a lesbian. That has happened within LGBT spaces that I've been involved with since 2014. Even within conferences where an intersex woman was told, no, intersex women can't be lesbians, that's just for women. Like, nah, doesn't work like that. So, show that you are willing to just take people on their own terms, that you're willing to accept them for who they are, and be respectful to them, and maybe some people will feel that this is a community that has got their back, that if they come out, you have their back. But also, if an intersex person comes out to one of you, don't go running around and say, I found an intersex person, I found an intersex person. Because they might be coming just out to you, not the entire community. And believe me, there are intersex people within your community already, because 1.7%. That's quite a lot of people. So if your community is bigger than 500 people, there are very low chances that there is not a single intersex person within your community.
Actually, I shared this already before in the morning, but we did, with Ljubljana Pride, we did as of March, a survey with LGBTIQ plus youth, and until beginning of or mid-May, about 495 young people answered. The survey is still open, and it will be until end of the year. We want to collect even more inputs, but already out of the sample of 495, we had 6 people identifying as intersex. So, like I said before, there's no chance anyone can ever contest that there is no intersex people. Yes, they are. And we have now something also to officially also be able to say that for Slovenia, yeah, and Slovenian context. But that said, it is true at the same time that at least in the LGBT community, in terms of organizations and activists that are active, we don't have, if that's the right expression yet, outed intersex people. We are not at a point where, you know, when we will share our working space and media attention and so on with intersex issues on that level. So as this is a reality, and I think it's going to take time to build this safe space. In the meantime, also probably doesn't give us an excuse not to do anything. So what are the, let's say, the basic human rights struggles? What are the basic demands on the international level? And here I'm also referring to what does Organization of Intersex International, for example, in this regard promote. So in terms of legislation, in terms of human rights, what are some of the basic things that would need to be kind of fought for or guaranteed in any country, in any society, so that at least to have like a starting ground, you know?
So, number 1, banning modification of sex characteristics for social or cultural or cosmetic reasons. Like, no, we shouldn't be performing cosmetic surgery on young kids. They should be able to ask for cosmetic surgery if they become of an age, or in the case of gender affirming surgery, then they should be able to access that at an appropriate age. There are cases in some countries where being found to be an intersex person during transitional healthcare systems, through the transitional healthcare system, that you're automatically excluded. So they do chromosome testing, and if you're found to have XXY chromosomes and you're a woman, they say, no. We're going to offer you a double mastectomy and give you testosterone because then you'll be a better man. So when it comes to, so after banning the surgeries for cultural or social reasons, then implementing a rights-based healthcare system, so that intersex people who have to go through the healthcare system, like we break legs, we get pneumonia, we have to go to hospital, that the care that intersex people receive is respectful and appropriate and actually fits the needs of that person, not what some one person who went to medical school thinks that everybody should have. That healthcare is, rights-based. That there are anti-discrimination and equality legislation implemented on the basis of sex characteristics, and also hate crime and hate speech legislation. Because for intersex people coming out, that will subject them to the danger of facing hate speech. And for somebody who can hide away rather than face that, that might sometimes become a more attractive option to continue remaining in the closet. The educational system needs to be updated, be inclusive of everybody, the needs and rights of everyone, no matter their sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or their sex characteristics. Asylum policies have to be updated to be intersex inclusive. So for people who are fleeing other countries, for example, we know of cases where parents of an intersex child fled Russia and sought asylum elsewhere because the Russian medical system was going to force them to have surgery done on their child against their will. When it comes to abortion, then while reproductive rights should be available to every person who can get pregnant, then no doctor should ever try to force someone to have an abortion against their will. And we have multiple cases of this happening with intersex children, that the parents are pressured again and again and again to have an abortion, to even after the time when abortion is allowed in that country, the doctors persist with offering late-term abortions because of this problem that their child is. Nobody should be forced to have an abortion. That's cruel. That's a human rights violation. It shouldn't be done. That's a choice that people make for themselves. And just general societal awareness. Like, let's get rid of this sensationalist media of hermaphrodites, two sexes, not a man, not a woman, because it's damaging to people. When you read that stuff, you just go, no, I don't want to be out there among all those evil people. I just want to stay here and be safe in my own little bubble. The coverage that Caster Semenya got when she won the gold was atrocious. Imagine being 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, and that is the coverage that people like you get in the media. That you're somehow wrong, that you're somehow not allowed to participate, that you're not allowed to be a part of society because you're somehow wrong. So, respectful media coverage. If you want sort of a more comprehensive list, I recommend that you go to OII, so Organization Intersex International, oiieurope.org. And there we have the Malta Statement, which is an international statement of intersex activists from around the globe about the key demands of the intersex community. You will find the Riga Statement, which is a short statement on sort of the key priorities of the European intersex movement. And you will find the Vienna Statement, which is a compilation of recommendations to different parts of society, so education, healthcare, media, and more. Just demands of that were produced during the first OII Europe community event, which was held in Vienna earlier this year. Maybe next year you'll have the Copenhagen Statement, because that's where our next community event will be.
Thank you very much. We are slowly coming to the end of this first discussion, and maybe now, dear audience, you have some questions or some comment for the end. Take advantage now that Kiri is still with us. And thank you, Tina. Just a second, we'll use the microphone.
So this might be a bit of a loaded question. I'm curious to learn about how do other cultures approach these topics. So you spoke about what I imagine is more like westernized. Do you know anything about that?
As varied as there are many cultures, if we look historically, there have been a billion different viewpoints throughout history. For in some regions of the world, a certain intersex variation where a child is born, assigned girl because she looks like what people assume girls look like, and then goes through more of a male puberty, is relatively quite well accepted, because there are in certain regions of the world there are so many children who go through that kind of puberty that so yeah, this is a child that starts out as a girl and becomes a boy. So in sort of Western, it's considered a medical disorder. In some countries, it's considered something to do with devils or demons, and intersex children are killed at birth. So in Kenya, for example, they have terminology there that's called breaking the sweet potato, because they use a sweet potato to break the skull as soon as the child is born. So anything from totally accepted to death at birth, and everything in between.
More questions? Just a second.
Hi. So the question would be the implications of the intersex issues. So how do they relate to the issues of feminism, for example? Because when you were saying, I was thinking, because the tenets of feminism were, okay, gender is constructed, we can deconstruct it. But I think when you look at intersex issues, it really shows a more nuanced picture. And I'd really be interested in what your thoughts about that are.
Feminism or families?
Feminism.
So, for feminism to be truly inclusive feminism, it needs to accept all realities of the feminine. There are feminists out there who I don't believe are feminists. If you look at, for example, Germaine Greer. Germaine Greer has written several books, and in one of them there is a chapter called Pantomime Dames, where she's stating that trans women and intersex women are not real women. She went so far as to engage in writing letters back and forth with a young intersex girl, saying no, you just don't know any better. You have male DNA, and therefore you can't be a woman. Feminism can be closed off and isolationist. It can be extremely white focused, where only the issues of white women will be accepted as feminist issues. It can be exclusionary for many people who are within the feminine sphere. But there are also feminists out there who are breaking down boundaries and talking about, for example, the issues that women other than cis, dyadic, so dyadic is a term that's sometimes used to mean people who are not intersex. Another term is endosex. Don't know which one I prefer yet, but yeah, who are talking about the experiences of trans women and dyadic, there are feminists out there who are focusing just on the issues of cis, dyadic, endosex, women who are white, live in Western countries, as the issues of feminism. Well, sure, you'll get to the issues of a small minority portion of women in the world, tiny minority portion of the women in the world. But then there are other feminists out there who are talking about the fact that if you go to a country and deal with the issues that, let's take the US as an example. In the US, if you deal with the issues that a single working class black mother is facing, and you fix the issues that she is facing, then you will automatically fix a bunch of the issues that a white woman is facing in that society, because there is a lot of structural racism and institutionalized racism. So if you start by fixing the issues of a person who has intersecting discriminations that are being faced, then you'll actually address the issues of a lot more than just that group of women. You'll address the issues that multiple women face. So for feminism to really, in my mind, count as feminism, it needs to take into account the issues that are faced by women of color, by trans women, by intersex women, by women of all sorts and flavors, and yeah. And it also needs to take into account issues faced by people who are not women, because there are non-binary people who face comparable discrimination as women, because somebody in society goes, well, I think this person may possibly be a woman, so I'm going to treat this person in a sexist and icky way. So without intersectionality, feminism is kind of bullshit. I didn't just...
Okay. Any final question? We'll take the final one.
Hello. In 2009, I did a 1-hour radio show on intersexuality, and at the national radio, I had 3 guests. The first was Dr. Tadej Batellino, who at the time, and I think also now, is the leader of the team who helps children, I'm reading, born with the disorder of sexual differentiation at the pediatric clinic in Ljubljana. Then with Tea Hvala, which was at the time a student of anthropology of sexes, and Tonja Blatnik, who was an author of comparative study about the intersex people in Slovenia and India. And I had a very long discussion with Dr. Batellino, around 1 hour, which was very very stressful discussion with him. And what surprised me was his firm conviction that he's helping and that he is doing the right way. Also, I asked him when they determine the right sex and they did all the interventions, if they then checked the child and he responded, of course we check the child, that he is developed in a normal heterosexual person, he said. So the question for me, while we are talking, they are still performing this operation, they are still suggesting the parents that they should do the parent decide, but they explain in a way that you cannot say no, because if you say no, you don't want to help your child. So what should we do in the meantime? How can we approach the parents and the doctors? So what would be your suggestion, what we can do to approach them and to somehow start to tackle these issues which now are not tackled and they are just doing their work in a complete calm and peace?
So, yeah, how old was he?
I think he was around 50. 45, 50, I think.
So now maybe 55, 60. The culture we grow up in colors our perceptions of things, and then a bunch of us, we stand up and we challenge the culture that we grew up in, and then others comply to the culture that we grew up in. So please imagine back to like the 1960s, 70s. What were the cultural aspects there? Of course that everybody had to be clearly male or female, clearly heterosexual, clearly, you know. I mean, the same sort of happens with when these treatments start. They originate in the 1950s in the US, and nobody wants to go back to the 1950s in the US. I know Mad Men is like interesting to watch, but nobody wants to live that. So we have to first sort of just get that this is cultural. This is hugely cultural, how culture shapes our thought processes. And for somebody who believes that everybody should be straight and clearly male or female and that there is nothing else that is acceptable in the world, of course they think they're doing what is best for the child. However, they need to be pointed out that the UN does not agree with them. The UN Committee of the Rights of the Child has issued recommendations to multiple countries calling out these practices as human rights violations, as has the UN Committee on Torture, Cruel, Degrading and Inhumane Treatment. So one thing that local activists could do, because it seems like as of yet there hasn't been enough sort of poking at them to make them guarded and try to hide too much what they're doing, is collecting all of this information, collecting it all together and bringing it to a body that can actually go to your government and say, no, 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 no. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. I'm actually surprised at the amount of information that seems to be readily available about what has been going on here within the medical system, because what I've been hearing, that's a UN report of its own, like, really. Pointing out to them that the High Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe has actually issued an issue paper on these issues, and I would be secretly very thrilled if one of the issue papers that I brought here with me could be sent to your Minister of Health in a nice little package with a bow. Has to have a bow. The thing is, if there was an easy way to just make doctors change their mind on this, we wouldn't have activists here fighting. Like, there have been activists since the 90s, like, calling doctors out on this. It's a slow process of grabbing your opportunities, realizing where your strengths lie, and sort of just plodding forward step by step, raising awareness, bringing to the attention of their superiors that what they're doing will actually get them called out by international mechanisms such as the UN, such as the Council of Europe. And increasingly, the European Union is becoming more aware of these issues, and the Fundamental Rights Agency of the European Union issued a focus paper in 2015. So I wouldn't recommend them sending OIA Europe's toolkit on how to become a good intersex ally. I don't think they're there yet. But making them aware that there are actually mechanisms out there that are condemning what is happening here. Just because the UN hasn't sent a specific recommendation to Slovenia doesn't mean that the recommendations that they've issued to Germany, France, Denmark, and countries all across Europe, which are also in the European Union, they also apply here.
We have to close this panel, unfortunately, because we have the next part at 8 o'clock, which we also want to still finish. So I would really kindly ask you if we can continue some of this discussion just outside. There's a little refreshment waiting there for everyone, so please don't leave. And please, there is, I'm pretty sure, still a lot of questions. You can ask them out there. Kiri is staying with us until the Pride also, so in the next days there will be, I think, some opportunities also to catch a moment. So thank you for this first part of the panel. Thank you very much for your exhaustive contributions and this discussion. I hope that during this festival we managed to make one small step also for our community here. Thank you very much.
turn on the microphone, nothing is there because.
Brother.